the monarch butterfly, where you take the monarch butterfly, where so they have the first generation, say the one that's in Mexico, they all go within 2 square miles. They're on these trees. So they leave there and they go to Texas, where they plant their eggs and they die. Then they come to northern United States. They plant their eggs and they die. And then that generation comes into Canada and they live here through the summer. And then they fly all the way back to Mexico and they know exactly where to go. But it's 3 generations. It's not this. And you start looking at this and you start realizing there's intelligence there that shows that if we can tap into this stuff, we can start to do amazing things, that the world is way more complex than people think it is. They just sort of think, oh, they're just dumb insects. When you start looking at them, you go like, oh shit, they can do that and they can do this. And it's like, or hornets, they say, not hornets, wasps, can recognize people's faces. They can recognize every hornet in the nest by their face, and they can tell when a hornet is in the wrong nest, and they attack it. And and bees can count up to 4. They can add and subtract, and they describe these experiments how they do this, teaching bees to add and subtract and count, and it's just like unbelievable. And you start looking at this. That's what sort of amazes me. It's the same as the UFO thing. When you start looking at it, it gets more complex and more complex, and you go, wow, this is possible and that's possible.
Imagine if humans could tap into that and all.
Well, but you see all these guys are doing it, like DARPA, and that's the whole point. Is people will say, well, we're not interested in sky pilots or this kind of stuff, but I'll guarantee you the agencies are interested.
You know they're looking
because
for
DARPA
sure.
that's where DARPA was formed. Because that's why DARPA was formed, because the Americans got beat to space by the Russians. And they said, never again will this ever happen. We will be on the leading edge. And so that was what DARPA was. You can go in, you can think about whatever you want, you can develop whatever you want. There was no restrictions. You got the money, just go ahead and think up something and do it. Whereas in the ordinary world, if you're doing at a university and you think up some crazy UFO idea, you're going to lose your pension, you'll lose your tenure, you're never going to get funded, whatever. Whereas DARPA, it's like, just think about the future. What can we do for the future? Any crazy idea, bring it in here, and we're gonna.
And they're well funded too.
We'll run it to the ground. And so I'm guarantee you they are. And that's where I said this thing where the CIA, the story what happened with me with these people at Mount Shasta in 2020, where they were levitated, and what happened was that I realized this is portal, and when we were doing the portal thing, I realized that. Guys like Ron Pandolfi kept talking about the portal, kept talking about this thing in the desert, and they kept indicating they had this portal. And then there was this thing that his wife had come through a portal, and then I remember somebody asked the kid, so you're on the other side? She said, yeah. And well, don't you want to go back? No, I like it better on this side. So this little kid, 6 years old, is confirming, yeah, she was on the other side of this portal thing. And so why would she make this up? So so this idea was that Ron Pandolfi and these guys, they were sort of watching what I was doing, and then they heard that they'd opened these Zendras portals at Mount Shasta. So they were going to send this guy by the name of Kevin Elber, and he was going to come with us, and we were going to go to Mount Shasta. And it was the old idea. They wanted to know, is this stuff that Mission Ramo is doing, is it connected to portals that the CIA is doing? And so what happened was that the 2020 people were herded off, because what happened was I phoned up this Kevin Elber guy, who was sort of helping the CIA. He was sort of like he wasn't connected, but he is connected. And I said to him, hey Kevin, guess what? There was another Zendra opened there. And there was 7 people, and they were levitated into the air, and there was 200 beings there and stuff. And he said, I said, don't you think it's about time that you told me the story about the portal? What the hell do you guys know about portals? What's the CIA know? And he said, okay, I'll make a deal. He said, you get these people, we do a show, you put the show out, you host it. And I said, Kevin, look, I'm not gonna, I don't want to be on camera, I don't want to host a show, it doesn't interest me whether, I'll help, if you want to put some girl on there and host a show, whatever, I'll do it. I said, and so then he said, well, you get the people together and we'll get the contract for the thing, and we'll get someone to do it, and I'll tell you the story of the CIA portal. I said, deal. So then I went, but then one of the people was Katerina Castillo, do you know her?
Yeah.
So Katerina was involved with the Pandolfi. She used to take care of their kid, babysit their kid, and clean out the stables for all their animals and stuff like that. And she went to the people who were involved. She was actually the translator with these people, these Mexican people who were involved. And she said, it's all CIA, it's all CIA. And they're gone. was the end of and so I phoned Kevin back and said, it kind of fell apart, Kevin, when they found out our seat.
I want to go back to Chris Bledsoe. We were talking earlier about people who flew the craft. Chris flew the craft,
Yeah.
and a really interesting story. But some of the details are kind of foggy. So can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, so and I heard that he had flown the craft. I said, you flew the craft? And he said, yeah. I said, don't say anything. Don't say anything more. I'm going to phone you. I'm going to go on Skype, and I'm going to interview you, and you just go from the beginning to the end. Just tell me the story from the beginning to the end, because I knew he was going to follow the same pattern as other people had told. So I phoned him up, and unfortunately Skype, the audio wasn't too good on Skype. But anyway, so I phoned him up, and that's when he told me the story. The craft was bigger on the inside than it was outside. And he said he looked outside, and he looked inside, outside, and so then he said I went in. And there was this pedestal, and he actually drew it for me. I think it's in the book. I think it's in the Skype book. So there's this pedestal, and he said it looked like it had a beehive on it. It looked like a beehive, and it was sort of like black, shiny plexiglass on the top. And they told him to put his hand on this beehive thing in the middle of this craft. There was the 4 beings in their hoods or whatever. And so he put his hand on the thing, and then he took it off, and he said it was like a CD-ROM. You know how you get that colors of
Iridescence, yeah,
so
the
the different rainbowy stuff of like different colors going across. He said that's what it looked like. You see where his hand was, and this sort of colors going across. And then he said everything started to change. He said there was hexagons, which is kind of weird because this is like beehives. He's the only one that's described the hexagons though. He said there was these hexagons in the wall, and they're turning these hexagons, and he said they started getting bigger and bigger, and they were spinning faster and faster and faster. And these hexagons, and he said everything started to change, the shape, everything started to change, the old sides of the craft, and these hexagons are spinning, and then he said, and all of a sudden the front window opened, and there was the Cape Fear River. And he said he sat down, and he was controlling it with his mind. He sat down cross-legged, and he was flying down, he was abducted on the Cape Fear River, and he was flying with this over the water, and he's cross-legged, and he's going, yahoo! He's flying down the Cape Fear River on this flying saucer. And so that's the story he told me, you know. And the thing is, I'm the only person he told, because that's what I said. Did anybody else ask you? He said, yeah, this U.S. Air Force general that asked him to describe how to fly the craft. So when I compare his story, and he told it to me, he didn't tell it to anybody else. I knew it matched with these other stories, the same thing. You put your hand on something, you become one with the craft, whatever you think is what you think. So he wanted to go flying down the Cape Fear River, and the craft said, okay, let's go, you know, where they go, down the Cape Fear River. And so he had a lot of things that, you know, when you start comparing the telepathy thing and the message, and you start to see all these connections that crossed over into you know, what other people have come across. Now he's into this orb thing, so he's photographing these orbs. And the one that he did describe, which fits in with the orbs, we're doing the orbs now. I remember he said to me, because remember Desta had found this one, we were at the University of Arizona, and there's this thing that come flying out of the sky, and it had embedded, it was like a spike with bubbly things on top, and it embedded into the garden. And the guy waited for it to cool down, then he got this knife and he dug it out of the garden. And so then I was using the word shot out of the craft, that they were shooting the stuff out of the craft. And then Chris emails me and he says, they're not shooting it out of the craft. And then I went back and said, you're not? What do you mean? He said it drips out of the craft.
So yeah, it's like molten.
And then I said, well, how do you know that, Chris? And he said, well, one came down the garage, one came down the driveway. And I think I had the photos by then. I'd seen these photos that he had. And he said it was 11 feet in the air, and it was an orb, and it was going along, and this metal was dripping out of this orb as it went along the driveway. And he went and scraped it all off the driveway, and they melted it down into this little ingot, a little tiny ingot. And so I've got a picture of the ingot, and I've got a picture of this thing in the driveway. And he said, that's how I know it drips, because he was standing right there as this thing flew by. And so he's got a lot of metal. And then there's the one with the honeycomb metal that is sort of leaked out of this. When they had this piece that had been analyzed in a government lab, and this is like a sort of a legitimate piece, and it was like a honeycomb thing, almost the same thing. It was like this hexagon thing. And so Mark Olson, the guy here that we went to the cottage, and Tim Taylor was there. he said to me that he showed Tim Taylor where this crash site was in New Mexico. And Tim had gone there. He'd met him at a conference there, a UFO conference. And that they said, we're going to a dig, we're going to a UFO dig, do you want to come along? And Tim said, yeah, okay. So he goes along, and he said as soon as he saw this honeycomb metal, he said he knew this is crash site, this is the real deal. And it all comes down to this honeycomb stuff. Now, I've seen the piece that Chris has. So Chris has a number of these pieces where he sort of floated them around, but he's always like, oh, this, I can't really tell you about this, but, and then you sort of hear that it comes from a lab, or he got a medal and stuff. So hopefully he'll straighten this all out in the book, and you'll get all the real stories. But he had
know when it's coming out, the book?
Today.
It's coming out
Today's
today.
the day.
So by the time we release this video, it'll be out right
And
on
in
the
my book, there will be some stuff that's in my book that he won't have, and that was one of the things I had in the bedtime storybook, was he had the story about the camera. I don't know if you're disturbed with the camera. So he started to photograph stuff, and he realized there's stuff around, so he starts photographing. And he gets this camera, $1,000 German camera or something like this. I can't remember the name of the camera was. But anyway, he gets the camera, and there's this golden orb goes flying by, and it goes clank. Last picture he ever took. And he said, what? Suddenly the pictures were called melted pictures. He said after that, so you take these pictures, and it'd be a picture of you, and it'd be just like melted. It was like the picture was melted. You see, it's all sort of smearing down and stuff like that. And I go, this is weird. So I put those in the book. There was a bunch of melted pictures. And so then I said, well, what do they say? And he said, oh, I didn't really ask them. We just got another camera. So then I said, oh, so I got the pictures of the camera, pictures. And I got the name of the company, and I wrote the tech people there, and I said, hey, can you tell me, why would your camera make pictures like this? And they said, oh, if you got trouble with the camera, just send it back, we'll get another one. I said, no, I just want to know why these pictures are turning out like this. Is there some technical reason why this might happen or whatever? He said, oh, no, it's okay. If you want to send the camera back, we'll give you another camera. I don't want another camera. I just want you to explain what happened to these photos. But they never would explain. They just kept offering me a brand new camera for that. But Chris had a lot of weird stuff happening like this. There was always stuff happening around him all day. And people would describe that all the time. Like Bob McGuire talked about that. People would go down there, and you'd have these experiences that would convince you, yeah, it's a real deal. Like when something like the dog happens.
Well, that's the weird thing, is that people have these UFO encounters, kind of abduction encounters, and then all this weird paranormal stuff, all this bizarre and completely high strangeness stuff starts happening.
Yeah, and his whole family had that. There's another story. So I talked to all the kids, I talked to the wife, and they all confirmed, yeah, shadow people, yes. Footprints in the thing. But they had it all sort of like, good versus evil, and they were sort of looking at it that way, whereas we look at it more like paranormal phenomena or whatever. But the one, now I've forgotten what I was going to say, interesting thing that Chris had, his son has, Ryan has a podcast. Now it's more for kids, and they're into, sci-fi.
The younger generation.
Yeah, so the first ones when they were doing the story, it was pretty interesting. And I actually had the transcript. I was the only one who had the transcript. They had lost the transcript of his regression. And then they came to me and said, Ryan said, you got the transcript? Where'd you get the transcript from?
Oh, yeah,
I said, I guess your dad gave it to me. I don't know. And he said, we haven't got the transcript. Can we have the transcript? Can we have the transcript? I go, yeah, okay. So I gave it. And then I realized they didn't have it. They for some reason, they had lost it, whatever. But anyway, in one of his shows, he tells this story. And this was Tim Taylor, who's another really sort of mysterious guy, who this guy is, or what he knows, or whatever. So Ryan tells the story, and this is just Ryan's story. So Tim comes to the house, and he says, Ryan, put your hand out. And Ryan puts his hand out, he puts this piece of metal in his hand. He says, what do you feel? Ryan says, no. Takes a second piece of metal, puts it in his hand. He feels this electricity go up his arm. He goes, holy cow. And he said, well, that's good, thank you. And they bring Chris Jr., same thing, nothing. Electricity up his arm. They bring the girlfriend, Chris Jr.'s girlfriend, nothing happens. And then they bring in the wife, same thing happens, gets the shock. Bring in all the kids, everybody. The only one that didn't happen to was the girlfriend.
So just the family members.
And then he said, this means that you've been face to face with an ET being. That's what Tim told him. He said, this proves you. And it's like, so what do they know? I mean, what do they know? What's the metal? Like, what's Tim Taylor doing here? And you start to see that kind of stuff, and that's where when you start to take experiences seriously, which I did with Chris. Well, I didn't have a choice because of what happened to me, but you start taking them serious, you start to realize like, oh, there's government people watching them, they have these events, he's talking about metal, where this metal's coming from, and you start getting all these background stories and you realize the story's way bigger. Whereas if you just take with UFO sightings and say, oh, Chris Bledsoe is just anecdotal, we're not going to listen to this guy, you're going to miss half the story. I mean, it's just, his story is so big and so complex.
It is, yeah, there's so many aspects, so it's always been one of my favorite cases. Chris is so genuine, you know, and you have multiple witnesses, family members, all the interesting people that come to see him.
Yeah, even Jim Semivan, who, of course, most of the people who came to him are all experiencers, which is another thing people don't realize. If you take Gary Nolan's an experiencer, clear experiencer, has had experiences his whole life, bizarre as can be. Jim Semivan's an experiencer. Hal Puthoff's kid is an experiencer. Hal Puthoff maybe is rumors he's an experiencer. You got Eric Davis had a UFO sighting the day he graduated. Him and his wife, this daylight sighting, which flipped him off the edge. And you start realizing that all these people are experiencers, and this may all be planned. It's all soul contract. All these people are coming together. We had a meeting before we were born, and we're all going to say, you do this, I'll do this, and we're all coming together. And you realize that it's this sort of mystery, but in the end, it's this sort of unraveling of a play that we're here on stage, and then when the play's over, we go off and leave stage, and we go to the next play, and even like Whitley Strieber, when I talked to him about this, and I interviewed him about his wife's message, where she dies, and then she says to him, sends him a message and says, Whitley, I am no longer Anne, but I'll always be Anne to you. Which means I'm off on another life, I've started another life now, but because I played Anne on the stage with you, I'll always be Anne to you. I won't be Anne to anybody else, but, you know, and that's the thing, you start realizing that there's this background, but most people would just ignore the experiencer and miss this stuff. Whereas when you start looking at them, which is what the government does, they're doing a lot more than we are. That's for sure. Or the idea with that's the whole idea behind the MILABs, is that Melinda is the expert on MILABs. That's what she'll say, is that the MILABs they're just trying to figure out what's going on. So they'll get you, and Melinda says they put a piece of equipment in your hand and say, can you work this? And the person goes, oh yeah, and the thing does what it's supposed to do, and then they say, got another one! And it's the old idea that they've got the material, they can't make it work. But if you're an experiencer, you can make it work, because there's this consciousness interface, you can make this thing work. And they're trying to figure out what are the experiencers being told, what kind of talents do they have, and they're trying to use it for military purposes. Because I did the one with Desta, and I have the book called The Apports coming out, and you did the cover for that. So in the Apports, I referenced this document from 1974, Defense Intelligence Agency document that says, like Apports is where you move stuff from one place to another. So a coffee cup disappears and it appears in the next room or something like that. So they said, we'll get the technology where we can get foreign documents, we can grab them, we can photograph them, and we can put them back without the enemy even knowing that we took them. That's what they're looking at. So when they go to Skinwalker Ranch, they couldn't care less about Skinwalker Ranch. They're just interested, how the hell did they put 4 bulls in a locked trailer? Man, if we could do that, I mean, there's some technology there. Or how do they make this stuff appear and disappear? And how do you mutilate a bull when it's like 15 feet away from someone without them even knowing? And it's this technology of the orbs and stuff. It's all, they're looking at it and going, wow. Because that's what happened when the guy came, this Defense Intelligence Agency lead guy, when he comes and he's sitting there, and Bigelow's sitting at the table, and whatever his name is sitting at there, and then all of a sudden this thing appears, this sort of an infinity sign thing made out of metal appears over someone's head. He said, I'm the only one that could see it, because it was in my frame of vision. These guys couldn't have seen it, and it was there for me. And it was sitting there, and he's looking at it, and then he sort of looks away, looks back, and it's still there. And then that's why they went in there. And it was sort of like, welcome.
Yeah, that's
right.
right.
We're wondering when you were going to arrive. It's like they're just showing up. Or I even say to people, like you look at the phenomena, and you start looking at it from their perspective, like why in the Nimitz thing, why did the object drop from 80,000 feet down to sea level in 7/8 of a second? What was it? It's showing off. It's going, watch this. And then they do the threat thing. They say, oh, these planes, they're a threat to, they come near planes. There's these balls, and they have the cubes inside the balls, and they came within feet of the plane. And you can just see them saying, Zogar, I bet you I can get closer to the plane than you can. And it's like, that's what they're doing. They're just playing these games, or they're sitting there in the Nimitz thing. They were there for a week before the Nimitz actually took
Yeah, they weren't seen to.
yeah, they didn't want to look at it. And then they said, maybe we should check this out. And that's when they said, finally, here they come, And then they said, hey, Zogar, you go under the water, make big, huge bubbles. And then they come back and say, man, there was these big bubbles under the water.
That's right. It's like they were messing with them and just screwing around, eh? Yeah.
And that's where you see, that's where I say, like, a lot of the phenomena, I think that's what it is they're doing these really bizarre things because they want people to tell these weird stories. And it's absurd. And it's supposed to be absurd because if it isn't absurd, you're not going to remember it. You're not going to pay attention to it. It's like this comedy of stuff that they're doing. It doesn't make any sense because that's when I saw it. Because the first night it came across the car, right in front of the car. There was no doubt what it was. It was like, holy shit. And then the second night it came at me.
What are you talking about? The Charlie Red Star?
Charlie Red Star. The second night it came directly at us, down at eye level, and then it made this turn and it went off into the northeast. So it came from the west towards us, came east towards us, made this turn.
So was this at nighttime? What was it saying? You're at
nighttime.
Out at night, out in the country?
12:45 in the morning. And there was a flash. It was flashing. It was moving around the sky. It was flashing all over the sky. And the same thing, like, what's that? Like, is that a pre-abduction maneuver where you jump over on the sky, and this girl couldn't see it, and she's crying, I can't see it. And the guy's, he's loading this camera, and people are swearing and yelling up and screaming. This thing's jumping around, and it comes in, and then it appears this red thing I saw the first night, and it's sort of pulsing, it's alive, it's pulsing, it's coming towards this green glow on the back. But the weird thing was it came at us, and then it went like this. So if it wanted to go from here to there, why didn't it just go there? Right. Why did it come at me? Because it wanted me to go, holy shit, they're coming right at us. And it's all this performance art thing where they're
it's doing, like, why do UFOs have bright lights on them?
Yeah, that's a grade one class. The grade one class. Yeah. How can you do it? Oh, put lights on it.
If they were trying to be really clandestine and really hidden, why would they do that?
And the grade 5s and grade 6s are mutilating cattle, and then the grade 7s are abducting people. And it's like, and it just gets more complex when you look at it. It gets more and more complex, like these orb things. Now these orbs are the big thing. I mean, all these people photographing them, and the guy's from Chicago, the stuff that guy's films, and he's from Getty Photos too. He works for Getty Photos, so he's not.
Yes, some of them are pretty strange when you could say argue they're dust or they're weird anomalies with lenses or stuff, but some of them you can see faces in them, like some of Chris Bledsoe's, you can see bizarre faces. I don't know. To just explain that away is something, I don't know. It's pretty interesting. Could we go back to, you were talking about, you went out with Chris to the cabin with Tim Taylor. I don't think we finished that story. You didn't.
Yeah, well, they all appeared there. They just all sort of, I didn't know who was coming there. I just knew that we were supposed to meet there.
Why? What was the reason for that meeting?
Well, they're all going to get together, like these, wealthy guys. And for example, Mark here, he was, the afternoon that we were leaving, or the day before we left, he was bringing in this psychic lady that he had been recommended by this Mark Leon, that she was his best psychic, and he had had problems with his business and people stealing money, and she had picked this all up, and so he was the NHL draft. And remember, he's in this room, and it's the NHL draft, and he's like, he used to be a curler for Canada. He's like a big sports guy, and it's like he'd never missed that. He drafts everything. He's got all the draft players. He knows who all is being drafted. He's this super keener guy, and he's in this room with this psychic lady, and so he's doing all this stuff. But we were there, and Peter Robbins was there. He had to leave. Tim Taylor only stayed a day. Then he went back. And it was the same sort of thing. They were just gathering together, and they were sort of talking to Chris about signing this contract or whatever. And I was just there because Mark had invited me, and for me it was an expensive trip. I mean, flying there and to go there and stuff. But I remember there was this interesting story where we were going back, and that gets into this whole thing about, you sometimes hear these stories about end of the world scenarios with experiencers and stuff like that, where people will get it. And I think they sort of do that to sort of make the story plausible deniability for skeptics. The UFO phenomena will do that, because we're going back, and then Chris had this idea that well, there's a couple things. I'll just do the one. The lady had said to him something was going to happen. And they gave the date. And I remember we were driving.
Yeah, it was a prophetic thing, and I think
Yeah.
that's why some of the people like Pasulka and other, like Tim Taylor, were interested in theology.
Yeah, and he'd gotten the one on his painting. You see on the painting of the tall, it's not gray, it's bluish green. At the bottom there's these two things on the bottom of the painting, and they are comets that were sighted about 3 years ago. And he had it. He said, I told you there was something in there, you didn't, you know. And he said, look at the bottom of the painting. And I go, yeah, you're right, Chris. He had drawn this in there. And there's all these sort of hidden messages, whatever. But then he said that she'd given him the message, something was going to happen. And it was sort of like the end of the world thing. Something sure was going to happen. And I said, Chris, they always say that. I don't know if I believe that. We're sitting in the back seat. It's like 5 o'clock in the morning because we got to be at there. We're like 3 hours away from the airport or whatever. And I'm just sitting there in the dark, you know, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. And I say, Chris, I don't know if I believe that. He leans over to me and says, I was there with her. You weren't. I know what she said. I go, sorry, Chris. That's true. I was there with her. You weren't.
Yeah. Did you get to talk to Tim much while you were there?
No, he was sort of a mysterious character. I didn't know if I'd known who he was today. I mean, now I hear this head dude, like one of the black ops, you know, top guy who knows what's going on. At that time, there was no secret names or anything like that. And he was just, I knew him as the guy that had been with Mark when they went to this field where they had this crash material in Mexico. And the things that he talked to me about two things. One was, he knew I was into downloads. So we were talking, I guess Mark had told me that he had this download of this invention. It had something to do with getting metal not to reject
skin tissue
in a joint or like and so apparently this is the one that sold for big money. And so he knew I was into downloads because I had the 2012 download, and then I had all the music downloads with Chris told me the story in this. So he said he started talking about his download. He said, well, you know what, Grant, I remember this story. He said, you know, Grant, the morning I woke up at that idea in my head, and he told me he couldn't get it funded. Nobody would do anything with it. He said he wanted to put it on the space shuttle. They had to test it on the space shuttle. And they were saying, oh, put this thing on the space shuttle? It's garbage. It's not going to work. No way. And he kept fighting with them. And he said finally he got some scientists to sign off on it and went on the space shuttle. It worked. And then in the book, in the Diane Pasulka's book, you'll see he gets called to the Pentagon. He goes, oh, I'm going to get an award or whatever. And this one-star general stands up and says, who the hell get on with this idea? And he'll play Tim Taylor. He goes, like he's all mad. And so this thing worked. And he said, you know, Grant, the morning I woke up with that idea in my head, the morning I woke up with that idea in my head, the last thing I remember the night before was a hooded figure standing at the end of the bed. And of course, my question was, could you see its face? And he goes, no, I couldn't see its face. And that's a common thing. If you've studied experiences, you know, the hooded figure, you can never see the face. And even Jim Semvat tells a story where the hooded figure came a couple of years ago, where his friend in CIA is dying in Florida, and they're going to go that morning to see his friend. He's dying, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, this hooded figure comes through the bedroom and goes out the wall on the other side, and he couldn't see its face. And there was the exact time that morning when his friend dies in Florida, and he believed they were coming to warn him his friend had died or whatever. So so we're doing this download thing. And then he says to me, he says, he knew I was into experiencers. And so he says, oh, I got a couple of experiencers that I deal with. And later I found out that what he does is what you're supposed to do. So you get an experiencer, and they're having paranormal experiences. They say, here, a notebook. Could you please write down everything that happens? Any visions? And this one girl, she used to live here in Steinbach, which is about 35 miles from here. And he says, I got a girl. She used to live near you somewhere, I think, up in Canada. And I said, where? And he said, Steinbach. I said, Steinbach? It's like 30 miles from the city. I said, he said, do you want a doctor? I said, can I? He said, yeah, sure. He gets his cell phone. He phones her. I get on the phone her and go, hey, Connie, Tim gave me the phone here. I'm supposed to talk to you. And she starts, oh yeah, I come from Canada and all sorts of stuff. And I got to know her really well. And she was predicting all sorts of stuff. She had things that she she saw, and then I found on the internet, we actually interviewed her. I've still got the interview. We have not released it yet. I think she allowed us to
How
release
did she
it.
get in touch with Tim? How would Tim know?
Well, he was following her. He's following all these experiences, because he's got, I don't know how many he's got.
And he would reach out to them?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then and so she had these, she saw one was a train in China where there's these 2 train tracks, and the trains are on the same train track. So there's this elevated train, and that's what she sees in her vision, is this elevated train, and there's a mountain in the background, and the train is hanging off the elevation. So they're on the same track instead of being on the there's 2 tracks, but it's on the same track. And so I find this on the internet. She said, oh, the Chinese scrubbed the internet and took it off. And so then I'm looking and I find it and I send it to her and I said, is this what it looked like? She said, that's it. How did you find that? I said, I found it on the internet. And then the other one she had was a coal mine thing in Utah where there was a blast and they sent down the rescuers to get these guys out, and 3 of those guys died. And they called off the rescue. And these 16 guys are down below, and she's down below with these rescue guys.
So she was having these premonitions?
She was with them.
Like psychic premonitions,
Yeah.
or she was actually there?
She was actually
telling
there.
these stories?
While these guys were dying, she was with them. And then she said to the being, she said, I can't take it anymore. She said it was like being on the internet 24/7. All this stuff in her head, she'd see this, she'd see that and stuff. And she said to the being, she said, I can't take it, stop, I can't. And it's just that they stopped for a long time. So he was watching her, and she was writing down all her premonitions and all this kind of stuff. And there's another woman that he told me about, but I never talked to her on the phone. So he set me up with her, and then the last thing we discussed was the weirdest thing. And again, you don't really realize until years later, you sort of go, whoa, what's going on here? In fact, I'll tell you a story that just happened the other day, that after 50 years, I suddenly remembered, and something's wrong with the story. But so she tells me this, now I forgot, let me tell you the story while I remember it. So Charlie Rest, I'm writing up these articles, Desta's doing these articles for the book. So I'm writing up orbs 1, 2, and 3. So I'm describing how when I started, they were called orbs. We called them groundlets. We didn't even know what they were. And they were different. They were like balls about this big, and they would sit on roads and stuff. And they'd follow cars around and stuff like that. Not like the orbs that you see flying around pictures and stuff like that. So I'm just sort of describing, like, it's not always been the same. Here's how orbs, how it started for me. And now I'm doing the other orbs, but this is how it started for me. And it came to, I'm discussing the 5 times I was close. 2 of them were with orbs. The first time was the first night we saw it. I got within 50, 75 feet. I was going to jump on the thing. I was that close. I figured, by the time that thing takes off, I can hit it. And I knew that Nikolak had been injured at Falcon Lake, but I said, hell with it, I don't give a shit, I'm going to touch this thing. And then the second one, and I just realized this, and I'm writing the thing up. So what we have is, we have these mile roads. So this thing would sit on the mile road. Mile roads, and it makes a checkerboard. So we'd go like this and come down the mile road, and this thing would always move back down the road. It would always stay the same distance in front, and then you turn around, the thing would follow you back again. So what we do is we'd go 2 miles road over, we'd go over, up 3 miles, and we'd cut across. And the first time, man, it was right there. So, oh shit, we fooled it, you know? And it was right there, and then, so we'd always do that. We'd come up this one and go across at the 3 mile. So we'd go across, and the thing is sort of down the road, it's farther down the road. And we're looking at it, and then I say, well, what we'll do is we'll go over to the next mile road over, and then we'll walk across the field, and we'll see if we can catch it off guard, because we could see it, and we go, so we take the road, and we go over there. All of a sudden I go, holy shit, there's another one coming down the road, and so this one's sitting on the road, and we're looking west, and we're on this road, and it's on the mile road, so it's about a 1/4 mile down the road here. And we see this one coming down, and I got the tripod, and it's like a 35mm camera, you know, and with the telephoto lens, I'm madly trying to get this thing screwed onto the tripod, and I get it just before they collide, just before it collides, and when they collided, it went like that, giant explosion, but no noise, just absolutely silent. It was just the weirdest thing. So then we walk across the field, and this is where the weird part comes in. I never realized this until maybe 2 days ago. We walked across the field, and we get there, and then it looks like it's on the next mile road over. It's just moved to the next mile road over. And I go, oh shit, that was a waste of time. And it's all muddy, we were going to just mud this field and stuff like this. And I'm going, oh shit, you know, so we're sitting there, and all of a sudden this noise, and it's like beehives. It's like, what the hell's that noise? It's like really loud. And it's like tree, like telephone lines, but the telephone lines ended about 6 or 7 telephone poles down. And so I figured, like, well, it can't be, they don't make that much noise, I mean, I got them by my house. So then I put my ear against the telephone pole, and I was like, holy cow, I got my ear against that, a beehive, it's just buzzing. And then I sort of look out down the thing, and it's right there. It's like three telephone poles over. And I'm looking at this thing, and I go, holy shit, it's right there. I don't remember anything after that. I didn't know it until I wrote the story the other night. I go,
Wow, really? Yeah.
that's all I remember. I remember we went back, but I remember, it's like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, you look at the thing, you would move farther out and you'd look at it, and you'd tell everybody, look at this thing, and we'd go closer to it.
The most amazing thing ever, and you don't remember it.
I just remember seeing it, and that was the last thing I remember. But at that time, I remember this is 1976. Intruders hadn't been written. There was nothing about missing time. There was nothing. We didn't know anything about any of that kind of stuff. So I looked at this thing, and I was just thinking the other night. I'm going, maybe it's in the first book. Maybe it's in the Charlie Red Star book. Maybe I described what happened after I saw that thing. But now I don't remember. I just remember looking, and it seems really weird. And I remember we used to have that thing on the road. That you'd look at the thing on the road, you could see it, and you'd go to the side of the road, just to the edge of the road, and you couldn't see the thing. And then you'd move back and you could see it, and then you'd go to this side of the road and you couldn't see it. It was almost like it was a tunnel of light. You could only see it from one angle of on the road, and even this thing was sitting on the road. And that was what it was like. It was like I couldn't see it, and I'm thinking, what's that noise? And then it was like when I moved out, then I could see it was right there. It was just above us, down the maybe 3 telephone poles, maybe 150 feet away.
What did it look like? Big orange?
Just or big orange. I can't even really remember specifically, but it was sitting right above the line, and it was, orangey, yellow.
And you could hear that buzzing noise.
Yeah, that's what initiated me. It was like, what the hell's that noise? And it was so loud. It was just like, wow. And that's why I couldn't figure out what the noise was. And I figured, well, what about the lines? Like, because I realized the lines ended about. We were on an abandoned road. The lines ended about 7 telephone poles down. There was no more lines after that. And I was like, well, what's, and then it's just sitting about the lines.
That's the craziest thing to think of. That was back in '75.
Yeah.
And you weren't into UFOs before that. You have that experience, and then look where we are now.
But you start looking at how complex the thing is, that even the stuff that happened back then, I can't even be sure that it actually happened. You really don't know. You start looking at, like, what the hell is possible? Is like now, you'll see people have these screen images where when they take them back and they regress them, it's a completely different story altogether as to what they saw. They were given a screen image or something like that. And the other kids wouldn't remember. There was kids with me, but they were about 14, 15. I'm pretty sure they wouldn't remember that event because they were pretty young. They remembered the one. And I remember the one was where the thing was sitting above the car, where the ground light was there, and I was showing these kids flashing lights at it, and the thing would flash back, and you'd go side to side, and it would go back and forth across the road and shit like this. And at that point, when the thing came and sit across the car, I never talked to kids. We were always talking about UFOs. Oh man, you see another one? There's another triangle. And we're, kids taking notes in the front seat. And then the kid became an aeronautical engineer, and he moved to Finland, and then he got divorced, and he came back to Winnipeg. So he lived about 3 houses down. So I'm shoveling my mother's driveway, and he comes walking by, and he said, "Oh, Grant, how are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, Brian, I've seen you for years." And he said, "Oh yeah, I was living in Finland, and I got divorced, and now I'm back." And so he go on, he says, "Hey, remember that thing we saw?" He says, "Remember this thing we saw?" I said, "You remember that?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "Brian, don't say nothing." And it's actually on the internet. I got the actual interview with him. I said, "Brian, don't say anything. I'm going to interview. I want you to tell a story, start from the beginning, end. I don't want to influence your story, whatever." And he tells a story, and he's telling the story, and he says, and it was sitting above the car with these lights on it, and he said there was 2 blue lights or something. I go, "Blue lights? There was no blue lights. There's 2 red lights and a green light in the back." And then he said, and there was that gunmetal, that gunmetal gray metal. And I go, "Metal? What is metal? There's no metal."
Wow.
And he said, "Yeah, there's metal between the lights." I said, "I didn't see no metal." It's like a totally different story altogether. And that's what you see. The problems with Intel, the memory, but also the idea that the phenomena can basically mess it around. Even the idea, like, how do you know it's a dream? It's, you could wake up and find out this is all a dream, and it's because you see so much of the stuff that happens that when you come down to it, you start to doubt your ability to mess things around, and to, if you go inside a craft and it's like 100 times the size inside as outside, like, that's like, pretty far from solid three-dimensional reality.